The Puritans were English Protestants in the 16th and 17th centuries who sought to purify the Church of England of Roman Catholic practices, maintained that the Church of England had not been fully reformed and needed to become more Protestant. Puritanism played a significant role in English history, especially during the Proctorate. Puritans were dissatisfied with the limited extent of the English Reformation and with the Church of England's toleration of certain practices associated with the Roman Catholic Church. They formed and identified with various religious groups advocating greater purity of worship and doctrine, as well as personal and corporate piety. Puritans adopted a Reformed theology and in that sense were Calvinists, as were many of their earlier opponents. In church polity, some advocated separation from all other established Christian denominations in favor of autonomous gathered churches. The separatist and independent strands of Puritanism became prominent in the 1640s when the supporters of a Presbyterian polity in the Westminster Assembly weren't unable to forge a new English national church. By the late 1630s, Puritans were in alliance with the growing commercial world, with the parliamentary opposition to the royal prerogative, and with the Scottish Presbyterians with whom they had much in common. Consequently, they became a major political force in England and came to power as a result of the First English Civil War, which happened from 1642 to 1646. Almost all Puritan clergy left the Church of England after the restoration of the monarchy in 1660 and the 1662 Uniformity Act. Many continued to practice their faith in nonconformist denominations, especially in Congregationalist and Presbyterian churches. The nature of the movement in England changed radically, although it retained its character for a much longer period in New England. Puritanism was never a formally defined religious division within Protestantism, and the term Puritan itself was rarely used after the turn of the 18th century. Some Puritan ideals including the formal rejection of Roman Catholicism, were incorporated into the doctrines of the Church of England. Others were absorbed into the many Protestant denominations that emerged in the late 17th and early 18th centuries in America and Britain. The Congregational churches, widely considered to be a part of the Reformed tradition, are descended from the Puritans. Moreover, Puritan beliefs are enshrined in the Savoy Declaration, the confession of faith held by the Congregationalist Church. Puritanism has a historical importance over a period of a century, followed by 50 years of development in New England. It changed character and emphasis almost decade by decade over that time, and today I'll be going over the history of the Puritans. Elizabethan Puritanism contended with the Elizabethan religious settlement with little to show for it. The Lambeth Articles of 1595, a high watermark for Calvinism within the Church of England, failed to receive royal approval. The accession of James I to the English throne brought the Millenary Petition, a Puritan manifesto of 1603 for reform of the English Church. But James wanted a religious settlement along different lines. He called the Hampton Court Conference in 1604 and heard the teachings of four prominent Puritan leaders, including Lawrence Chatterton, but largely sided with his bishops. He was well informed on theological matters by his education and Scottish upbringing, and he dealt shortly with the peevish legacy of Elizabethan Puritanism, pursuing an erratic religious policy in which he was arbiter. Many of James' religious opponents were Calvinists, notably James Montague, who was an influential attendant. Puritans still opposed much of the Roman Catholic summation in the Church of England, notably the Book of Common Prayer, but also the use of non-secular vestments, cap and gown, during services, the signing of the cross in baptism, and kneeling to receive Holy Communion. Some of the bishops under both Elizabeth and James tried to suppress Puritanism, though all other bishops were more tolerant, and in many places, individual ministers were able to omit disliked portions of the Book of Common Prayer. The Puritan movement of Jacobean times became distinctive by adaptation and compromise, with the emergence of semi-separatism, modern Puritanism, the writings of William Bradshaw, who adopted the term Puritan for himself, and the beginnings of Congregationalism. Most Puritans of this period were non-separating and remained within the Church of England. Separatists who left the Church of England altogether were numerically much fewer. The Puritan movement in England was riven over decades by immigration and inconsistent interpretations of Scripture, as well as some political differences that surfaced at that time. The Fifth Monarchy meant a radical millenarian wing of Puritanism, aided by strident popular clergy like Vavaster Powell, agitated from the right wing of the movement, even as sectarian groups like the Ranters, Levelers, and Quakers pulled from the left. The fragmentation created a collapse of the center and ultimately sealed a political failure while depositing an enduring spiritual legacy that would remain and grow in English-speaking Christianity. The Westminster Assembly was called in 1643, assembling clergy of the Church of England. The assembly was able to agree to the Westminster Confession of Faith doctrinally, a consistent Reformed theological position. The Directory of Public Worship was made official in 1645, and the larger framework, now called the Westminster Standards, was adopted by the Church of Scotland. In England, the standards were contested by independents up to 1660. The Westminster divines, on the other hand, were divided over questions of church polity and split into factions supporting a reformed episcopacy, Presbyterianism, Congregationalism, and Erasticism. The membership of the assembly was heavily weighted towards the Presbyterians, but Oliver Cromwell was a Puritan and an independent Congregationalist separatist who opposed his doctrines upon them. The Church of England of the Interim, which was from 1649 to 1660, was run along Presbyterian lines, but at the time of English Restoration in 1660, the Savoy Conference was called to determine a new religious settlement for England and Wales. Under the Act of Uniformity 1662, the Church of England was restored to its pre-Civil War constitution with only minor changes, and the Puritans found themselves sidelined. A traditional estimate of historian Calamy is that around 2,400 Puritan clergy left the church in the Great Ejection of 1662. At this point, the term dissenter came to include Puritan, but more accurately described those clergy or lay who dissented from the 1662 Book of Common Prayer. The dissenters divided themselves from all Christians in the Church of England and established their own separatist congregations in the 1660s and 1670s. An estimated 1,800 of the ejected clergy continued in some fashion as ministers of religion, according to Richard Baxter. The government initially attempted to suppress these schismatic organizations by including the Clarendon Code. There followed a period in which schemes of comprehension were proposed, under which Presbyterians could be brought back into the Church of England, but nothing resulted from them. The Whigs opposed the court religious policies and argued that the dissenters should be allowed to worship separately from the established church, and this position ultimately prevailed when the Toleration Act was passed in the wake of the Glorious Revolution in 1689. This permitted the licensing of dissenting ministers and the building of chapels. The term nonconformist generally replaced the term dissenter from the middle of the 18th century. Some Puritans left for New England, particularly in the years after 1630, supporting the founding of the Massachusetts Bay Colony and other settlements among the northern colonies. The large-scale Puritan immigration to New England ceased by 1641, with around 21,000 having moved across the Atlantic. This English-speaking population in America did not all consist of original colonists, since many returned to England shortly after arriving on the continent, but it produced more than 16 million descendants. This so-called Great Migration is not so named because of sheer numbers, which were much less than the number of English citizens who immigrated to Virginia and the Caribbean during this time. The rapid growth of the New England colonies, around 700,000 by 1790, was almost entirely due to the high birth rate and lower death rate per year. Puritan hegemony lasted for at least a century. That century can be broken down into three parts: the generation of John Carn and Richard Mather, which was from 1630 to 62, from the founding to the restoration, years of virtual independence and nearly autonomous development. The generation of Increase Mather, which is from 1662 to 1689, from the restoration and the halfway covenant to the Glorious Revolution, years of struggle with the British Crown, and the generation of Cotton Mather, from 1689 to 1728, from the overthrow of Edmund Andros, in which Cotton Mather played a part, and the new charter, mediated by Increase Mather, to the death of Cotton Mather. I just want to say thank you guys for watching this video, and I hope you guys learned a lot of stuff about the Puritans that you guys didn't know before this. Hope you guys learned specifically about the religious struggle in Europe and their eventual migration to the New World, and after that, the establishment of Puritan villages across New England. So yeah, once again, thank you guys for watching. Subscribe if you want to see more of this content. Comment down if you want to see any videos and what you want me to make a video on. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you all next time.